So many improbable things happen, and they're all around us. And you keep hearing them happen to younger people, but older ladies are people too, and they happen to us. Just utterly improbable things.
This information is spreading.
There will be a
We only have
surprise
so many
outbreak.
beds.
Is the issue of
Isn't
pandemic?
that how I
No
thought I
social
would end
distancing
college?
at all.
They said that they would express their concerns about the mask supply.
Where's the
One
mask?
expert
Where's the
says
glove?
a second wave is possible.
We all need some good news.
This is a message for all the healthcare workers out there.
Thank you.
If you're looking for hope tonight, raise your hand. If you feel alone and don't understand, if you're fighting the fight of your life, then stand. We're gonna make it through this hand in hand.
From Santa Rosa, California, this is 19 Stories. I'm Cheryl Halling. Laura Wills Mooney has been acting on stage throughout her life. After completing graduate school, she worked as a clinical social worker for Kaiser Permanente Medical Group, eventually serving as Chief of Psychiatric Work at their Richmond facility in California's East Bay. After her retirement, she studied improvisational theater at Bay Area Theater Sports in San Francisco, also known as BATS, voiceover at Voice One in San Francisco, and is now immersed in the world of audiobook narration. Laura joins me today on the eve of the release of Pixar's new animated feature, Soul, of which Laura has a role in. And in addition to other topics, we'll be chatting about how that part came about for her. Laura Wills Mooney, a very warm welcome to 19 Stories.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your holiday week to talk with me. I especially appreciate it, given it is Christmas week.
Yeah, but it's nice to be connected with other people. I've never been connected by podcast before, but with COVID, you pretty much have to be adaptable and learn to connect in different ways. So this is a new thing for me.
Well, it certainly is the theme of 2020 is how to be adaptable and versatile. And I think if we've learned nothing, hopefully we've all learned that. And so how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. One of the things that had made me fearful is that my son is a techie, and he works on a fairly isolated Indian reservation in Northern California, and he works in the healthcare center.
Oh, wow.
And I had been apprehensive about how much patient contact he would have or contact with the nurses and physicians who have direct patient contact. And I've been really pleasantly surprised about how progressive that the clinic is being in terms of protecting the healthcare workers with protective equipment, and also a lot of whole procedures have changed to make it safer for everybody.
Well, that's really encouraging to hear because we have heard of so many reservations across the country. I think of New Mexico in particular that have really had a hard time with COVID and outbreaks within their communities. So it's, I'm sure as a mother, comforting to know that your son is being well taken care of.
Oh, absolutely.
Whereabouts are you located?
I'm located in Sebastopol, which is west of Santa Rosa.
I'm curious, just this is a total sidebar. I'm curious about the origins of your middle name, Wills.
That was my maiden name, and I like to use it professionally as Laura Wills Mooney rather than straight Laura Mooney, because my father was in show business briefly when he was a young man. He worked as an actor in Hollywood and a sometime director, and palled around with some of the Hollywood people that were of that era. Unfortunately, World War II came along, and my grandmother then got in on the act and said what every good West Texas lady would say at that point, which is, no married man with a child has any business traipsing around on the stage. You need to get a real job.
So your father never continued with theater?
No, he didn't. He had a lifelong interest in it. But no, he didn't pursue it professionally because there was, too much pressure all the way around.
So your middle name Wills, it's an homage to your father.
Yeah.
And was he supportive of given he wasn't able to pursue his acting, was he supportive of you doing so?
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%.
Beautiful.
When I was 16, there was a countywide competition from the drama department. They issued this competition because they were gonna put on the Diary of Anne Frank, and theater freak that I was, I auditioned for them, and I was lucky enough to get the part, and opening night, although I was not aware of this ahead of time, my father showed up. I had told him, over the phone that this was happening, but I didn't expect that my father was going to drive all the way up from LA, but he did. And he not only drove all the way up, he had a dozen red roses for me. I mean, he was thrilled. He was sitting with my sister, Lois, and she told me later how proud he was of me. And obviously, to make that much of an effort, clearly he was.
What a beautiful expression of support, because sometimes when people aren't able to pursue their dreams or passions, there could be a resentment passed on to their kids, but that obviously wasn't the case with your father. Now, when you say he drove up, were your folks separated or divorced at that time?
My parents were divorced,
I
yeah.
see. Okay.
Yeah.
In addition, Laura, to this being the week of Christmas, there is something really rather exciting happening for you on this Christmas day. And before we talk about that, I'd like to share a bit about how your upbringing helped to influence your history in the theater, much along the lines of what you started to share, and then about your life as a clinical social worker, because you have a great analogy as to why the two really do have more in common than one looking from the outside would think.
I should go ahead and share that with the audience at this point.
Obviously in our correspondence and kind of getting some pre-discussion information, you shared a quote that I thought rather than me read it, I'd really love because it was beautifully expressed. And I thought, let's hear it from you.
Now I know what you're referring to. When you first look at a life history, well, you did this for X period of time and then you did that. And there seems to be almost a right angle turn. These things are so far apart. And when you really look at the skill set or what's demanded of these two different arenas, there's way more in common than you would initially think. And what they both share is a requirement that you be an acute listener, that you be on. You can't take a mental vacation when you are with a patient.
And again, the analogy is between your social work and acting.
Right. You also can't take a mental vacation when what I talk about a mental vacation, I mean, there are some jobs in which it really isn't critical to be on 100% of the time.
Sure.
Like, I don't know. I'm sure that the audience can fill in. They've had jobs in which it was possible that they knew the job that well that they could just routinely do it and also think about, the groceries.
Right, what they're making for dinner.
Yeah,
Sure.
exactly. Or I've got to remember to pick up Aunt Sarah at the airport, and other occupations where there's a necessity for you to be 100% there 100% of the time. Clearly, in therapy, when you're the therapist, your mind can't wander. It can't wander at all, because in the back of your mind, you've got kind of an 8-track tape running. Not only what the patient is saying to you, but what is there that they're not saying to you that you would expect to be there.
The subliminal text. Yeah.
What is their medical history and how could that be contributing to what's going on? What is their cultural history? What are their religious beliefs? Anything that could impact the reason why that patient is there. So you just can't take a mental break. It requires you to listen. As an actor, you're also required to be there, because if you are mentally not completely there, that's going to show up on the mic. It'll show up in commercials. It'll show up in reading audiobooks, which is what I'm currently doing. And when you're on a camera, you can't take a mental break either, because that's going to show up in your facial expression.
Or conversely, live theater. especially
Oh,
not live
yes,
theater.
absolutely. Because not only are you simultaneously saying the lines, reacting to other lines spoken to you, but you've got this third ear. And what that third ear is doing simultaneously is it's listening to the audience. Is the audience getting restive? Are they dead quiet because they're really concentrating and into the story?
Are they asleep?
Yeah, or asleep. God forbid. And you're listening to what's happening off stage, the hisses from the stage manager about, you've gone on too long with this, or we're behind the schedule, or, whatever it is that they're trying to convey to you. So again, the requirements to pay astute attention. And when you look at it in real life, you can tell when people are taking mental vacations, when they're only half there. And it's not that that's a bad thing to happen, because people can't always be on, like you have to be in these two occupations, or you would have to be as an airline traffic controller. You're constantly on. It's good to take mental vacations. Your mind needs to do that. But you have to really train yourself to step out of that world, and for an hour or on stage 2 or 3 hours, you've got to be completely there. And that can be utterly exhausting.
Well, sure. In one instance, you're dealing possibly with life and death.
Mm-hmm.
In the other one, it could be emotional or career life or death, right?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned training. And speaking of training, you grew up in a household where your mother was deaf. And
Yes,
I would imagine that had a huge impact in your level
absolutely.
of empathy and for other people and in your listening skills.
Well, ironically, I learned how to listen from a woman who was deaf, which sounds bizarre or almost impossible. But it was like taking being the child of a deaf parent is like taking a master class in how to
And
listen,
communicate, sure,
because you're listening not only for yourself, but you're
for
listening
them.
for, in this case,
Yeah.
my mom. If the phone rang, I answered it. If the doorbell rang, if the rain was starting to come down, it'd been threatening all day, but today it's starting to come down, and you've got clothes on the line. So that constant level of alertness, it's a certain zone that you have to get in. I mean, in my lifetime, or when I was a child, it was like my mother was always there. I was always, yeah, I don't know, like a human support dog or something like that. Not that she ever treated me badly at all, but that when you have a support animal, that animal is just hyper alert to anything that may endanger you or that you would want to know about.
Yeah, and you had a level of responsibility that most kids can't relate to.
Yeah, but I'm always kind of apprehensive that, telling people what my childhood was like with a parent who was deaf, is it sounds sort of Dickensian,
Yeah.
poor little Eva on the ice floes, or tied to the railroad tracks, or whatever.
But I didn't get that.
I'm sure you didn't, but I'm apprehensive that if I talk about it, it's going to sound like, oh, you poor thing, because the way my mother handled being deaf was kind of amazing and heroic. She was born a hearing person. She didn't lose her hearing until she was age 28.
Wow, what a profound life change for her.
Huge. She told me the story. She was sweeping the floor in the kitchen, I think. And the last sound she heard was a roaring sound, which later the otologist told her, well, that was the sound of blood flow in your brain. What had happened is the onset of a genetic disorder. It's called otosclerosis. It literally means that your inner ear
Implodes or something? Oh,
calcifies.
wow. That fast?
No, the onset of the disease, it's been on, but my mother wouldn't notice. Nobody would, until the last part of the
Oh, I
calcification,
see.
where the hairs
Mhm.
are on the, I think, stapes bone. I'm not sure. But at any rate, they're called cilia. They're actually like little eyelashes or hairs or something, and they vibrate, and that's what creates sound in your brain. Well, it isn't until the cilia themselves completely freeze. They calcify. that you can tell that you are now deaf. But the process has been going along for some time. It just expressed itself in that moment.
You hear of people losing their sight and or hearing, well, later in life as we age and, our sight fails, our hearing fails, but to be 28 years old and really, gosh, that's so young. And
Yeah.
to have a young, now she had you at the time?
No, she lost her hearing 2 years before I was born. So fortunately, my older sister was still in the house or in the household at that time because she was kind of a second mom to me growing up. Because while my mother, like any other caretaking person with an infant, is, just hyper alert to that infant and constantly aware that they need to be fed, they need to be changed, they need medication, they're bored, they need to be picked up. Whatever the infant does, the only way that an infant expresses themselves is through crying
Yeah.
to alert the person, hey, something's changed and I don't like it. And anyway, I need help. So come on over. I mean, with the best will in the world, even a parent with all 5 senses working, there are going to be times when that parent is not able to attend to a child immediately.
Mhm.
So when you compound that with the fact that one of her major sensory organs is now non-operational, there were a lot of times when I cried out and she could not hear me, and my sister Lois was able to pinch hit. And she would come directly home from school. And I was lucky in that both my mom and my sister were very loving and very, very attentive. My sister grew to not be so thrilled with the whole idea of having her own living baby doll later on during my childhood when I would insist that I wanted something that she adamantly didn't want. She would go to the movies with her friends, and my mother would ask her if she would take me along, and of course my sister would.
No.
Yeah, and there she was, 12, 13 years old, just at the beginning of teenage years and easily embarrassed. And there she is with this tiny child, 2 or 3 years old, at the movies, and I'd say, "I have to go potty."
Right in the middle of the movie, I'm sure.
Yeah, and then when she wouldn't pay attention right away, I stood up and said in my best, most authoritative, screechy, high 3-year-old voice, "I have to go potty." My sister was mortified.
God bless your sister. So there was an adjustment not only for your mom, but for your sister.
Mhm.
In some ways, a gift for you because it was the training ground not only for your first vocation, but especially for where you're at now. And I want to talk about your social work. So, how long were you with Kaiser Permanente?
I got out of graduate school in 1975 and went to work at their San Francisco facility in pediatric medical social work, and I covered the pediatric ward and the neonatal intensive care unit, and did that for about 2.5 years, and then an opening in psychiatry came about in the Richmond facility, so I moved up there, and I was with them for 18 years, so it was close to 21 years.
Take us through how you made the transition from social work and leaving that world entirely to revisit your love of the theater, study improv and voiceover, and then landing on audiobook narration as your preferred genre.
What happened was I was I was phenomenally lucky. I was one of the last people in the Kaiser Permanente Medical Group, which is the organization that I actually got paid by, that actually employed me. They, at that time, wanted to get rid of their highly paid physicians and replace them with newer, younger, less financially demanding
Nothing's changed, has it? Wow.
people. I'm afraid not. And they approached the, the IRS and the California State Franchise Tax Board. Is this how would we be able to legally do this? Well, you're going to have to give all the people that work for your group, and that includes non-physicians who, have a license and can practice independently. We were all in that same medical group. You have to offer the same deal for them. They have to be able to, in other words, to get early retirement. So they offered that, and a surprising number of people took it. Healthcare is very demanding. So I was able to get in on this and retire 5 years early, and they artificially add, I think, 5 years to your age and 5 years to your time of service. Anyway, it was a good deal for me and a good deal for them. So I got early retirement, and that facilitated, being able to seriously think about what is it that I want to do. And I mean, it almost wasn't even a question. I wanted to be in the theater. Well, making a living acting is, has always been a very difficult act to bring off. So I was reading a newspaper one day, and they had an article about a lady who ran a voiceover school in the Bay Area. So I thought, good Lord, I never thought about that. It just never occurred to me. And with the advent of technology, you can now work at home. You're not condemned to run from studio to studio in whatever town is available where the audition is being held. So since I have a son, that was a huge advantage. So I thought, well, I can do that. And then promptly studied for years and found out that I really couldn't do it. And the thing that got in my way was it was very, very difficult for me to make the transition between acting in one medium to acting in another, because I thought all that's required is acting. Well, I knew how to act. What I did not know was all the stuff that's in back of voice acting. As the situation currently is, as you know, if you're a narrator, you not only have to narrate, you have to learn the technology so that you can edit, and you have to learn how to master. Well, this involves a bunch of technology. But more importantly for the actor, it demands that you learn to have a conversation and to not punch the words in certain ways that you would if you were doing the same thing on stage. And my only experience up to that time had been on stage. So making a transition from stage acting to trusting the mic enough to just deliver the lines as though it was a real conversation instead of an actor punching certain
Sure,
lines.
projecting to an audience that's, 50
Yes.
feet away. Well, no, you've got your mic inches away. But, the one thing that I will say that you have such an advantage, Laura, is there's so many people, as you know, coming into the world of voiceover and audiobook narration that they think people who are very tech savvy who do think, well, it's just a matter of learning the technology, where it is really about the acting. Music to an actor's ears are make it smaller, bring it down,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to, could you give me a little more, please? Do you have anything else to squeeze out,
Yes,
out, out of that reed there? And so your advantage, I see, is that you had the acting training. And so it's just about technique. That is not to say, because I am learning that as well. You and I do have a bit of a history, which I'll speak to in a moment. But if kind of our biggest challenges, and this is not minimizing them in any way, is technology, that is certainly the better side of the coin, I would say, than having all the technical skills and really not quite
exactly. Yeah.
getting the other.
Yeah. I know what you're saying is true, and I agree with it. It's just that it feels like with technology, I'm confronted almost hourly. I'm exaggerating, but it just feels like every few minutes or an hour or so, something pops up that is brand new
Mhm,
that you must learn how to do, and you must have it, and you must know this skill. And
mhm.
then you've got all the social media. All that social media stuff is completely brand new to me. It's not just that it's new, it's the whole concept behind social media. Yes, you want to advertise your product. Yes, it's a way of letting other people know that you exist. These are your skills. This is what you're especially good at. This is what you enjoy doing. Yes, that's all legitimate. But I guess all that stuff gets interspersed with making friends on social media, making a relationship. And then all of a sudden, it's all about the cute thing that their cat did, or, what they had for lunch, what they saw on vacation. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to connect with people on that level and to find areas of commonality. But there's so much of it, it drowns out its purpose as social media or as an advertisement.
I had this conversation with someone the other day, and it's really about staying focused and not diverting your attention and not getting distracted. And it's real easy. I mean, I will pick up the phone and, check social media, and literally an hour goes by, and I think, what the heck just happened? I'm curious because audiobook narration was a real interest of mine until I realized, I mean, I would love to at some point in my life do an audiobook, but the focus and concentration it takes to really sit in a booth and do this for weeks on end is a real skill.
It's daunting.
Yeah, it is. And so again, how do you go from stage acting and improv, which is very physical and very interactive, to choosing audiobook narration? And so that's kind of the first question. And then what kind of books are you attracted to that you really want to narrate?
First question, how do I go from stage with great trepidation. Because not only do you have the technology and sit in the booth, you do it for hours on end, but there are breaks in between those hours because otherwise your voice would give completely out. But I don't know that many people are aware of this, but you physically have to line up with the chair and the mic and the audio interface and the computer in the same way that you did yesterday and the day before that and 2 weeks before that. You are literally exactly so many inches from that mic, exactly so many inches forward from the table, and you have to avoid having your chin come out to reach the mic. In other words, your head has to be just squarely on your shoulders, and you can't extend your head because it strains your vocal cords. That's just one of a whole bunch of requirements about the physicality and how restrained it has to be. So it's hard to have a lot of latitude when your latitude is half an inch one way and half an inch the other way.
Sure, it's almost like you have a brace on your neck and your
Something
body.
like that, yeah.
Yeah, which is why I was curious how you got to that particular genre when, say, and this is going to lead me into another question, but say animation, which is very physical. Again, I happen to know you have a love for books and reading, so I'm curious if that's what attracted you to just say, okay, books have
That's
characters.
pretty much it.
Okay. Okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah, there you
Okay.
go. But it is pretty much it because it's all of a piece with the rest of my life because the kinds of things that I like to do are, not surprisingly, I like thrillers, I like mysteries, I like legal thrillers as much as I do medical or psychological ones. There's an author whose work I really enjoy. She writes the embodiment of the psychologically based thriller. Her name is Ruth Rendell. She's a British author. And the thing that I like about her work is that she writes stories that are on the surface at the beginning of the story about a perfectly ordinary person doing a very average thing, posting a letter at the post office or buying oranges at the grocery store with absolutely no intention whatsoever of getting entangled in a kidnapping or a murder or, passing spy secrets or anything remotely like that. They're just Joe citizen, completely average person. And she takes these tiny, tiny steps, and each tiny, tiny step brings them one tiny step closer to getting sucked into being somebody and doing things and saying things that they would never have dreamed of. And you can see how they got sucked into it. And at each point, you kind of want to scream at the character, wake up.
Kind of like at a good thriller film where you're
Well,
just,
exactly. I mean, sometimes they just are utterly, and you can understand how it happened, that this particular person might be completely blind, but how is it that, a woman of 27 or early 30s sees some man drive up on a Harley hog with a I don't know, an absence of dental work and, you know,
That's very diplomatic.
just looking like the world's biggest ex-con, and she mistakes him for Mr. Right. I
Hmm.
mean, what is it that you're surprised about, lady? I mean, how could you not know this?
1 and 1 equals 2.
Yeah, right. Hello.
Hello, lady.
Yeah, right, earth calling. So, I like stories about that, and oddly enough, I have this other kind of strange side. I love plants. I dearly love plants. So, I'm interested in stories that are about I didn't know this until I took a bunch of landscaping courses. There are actually people who have their trips paid to, I don't know, odd parts of Asia or, I don't know, the polar ice cap, just way far away places, and they hunt for plants never been introduced into the Western world that they
Well,
think
who exactly pays for those trips?
seed companies
Oh,
and
really?
research companies
Interesting.
in universities, botanists.
Who would have thunk? Well, that makes sense. I mean, someone needs to discover
Yeah,
them, right?
exactly, or, unknown Indian tribes in Borneo who know about pharmaceutical companies will do this.
Okay, well, that makes sense. That definitely makes
Right,
sense.
about plants that reduce swelling or the cocoa beans that the Indians, the Incas, used to get rid of toothache and other pain. I'm interested in plant hunters, and the other thing that is kind of offbeat is the weather. I'm a real weather freak. I love the Weather Channel.
Actually, I never knew that about you. To talk about how you and I first met, because we do have a previous history
Yeah.
other than having this chat. You and I first met when we both joined a short lived radio drama
Uh-huh.
acting troupe. I really didn't know that about your passion for the weather. See,
Yeah.
we learned something every day. I had to invite you here so that I could
Yeah, I
find that
could
out
find
about
out
you.
how interested I am in earthquakes and floods and all the rest of it.
Tornadic activity.
Yeah, at one point, I actually seriously thought, I guess, for about 2 weeks, because I soon learned other things about it, storm chasers, that people go
You
out.
really thought about doing that?
Yeah, about, I thought that I would just love being along in that truck when you can see the birth of this event, the birth of a tornado. And what happens and how they get out of the way and in time, and then I started seeing the other part of it, and that pretty much
Mhm.
stopped me cold about going out and storm chasing, which is the devastation, and the look on the people's faces. I mean, that picture that Dorothea Lange shot of it's the famous shot of, because she was in the
Mhm.
WPA, about the woman and the carrying the kid.
The
The
child,
child,
yeah.
yes, and that woman's face just embodied devastation, just totally reflected it, and then I saw that same look on the survivors of the people who'd had their homes blown away. It really cooled my ardor to be it felt like I was getting something out of, as a result of these people's lives being overturned, or God forbid, people are killed, but
Right.
still, the weather phenomena just interests me.
Well, that's the really empathetic side of you, because I actually do know a storm chaser, and
Wow.
the photographs, well, he's a photographer, and he does that really more for his photography, and he's never posted pictures of devastation and human
In
suffering.
the aftermath.
But it is quite awe-inspiring to see the birth of a tornado or, what is actually going on in a hurricane and be able to capture certain images. But it's amazing that you would have that forethought to go, all right, as much as I would like to witness this natural phenomenon, I really don't want to see the other side of that. So what I
Driving
was
towards when I diverted us off into the weather.
No, that's okay. Getting back to when you and I first met,
Oh, right.
I knew you and know you as a very gifted actor, but the world of animation was not something I knew you were pursuing. And we're going to transition into what's going on for you this week, which is so very exciting, but it wasn't something I knew
Oh,
you to be
yes, yes.
pursuing. And I guess one could gather by what you shared about when you graduated graduate school and your history as a clinical social worker and being head of psychiatry and having a son, et cetera, that it's safe to say that you've had some years of experience and you're not, let's say, a younger person pursuing a career in animation. And yet, this Christmas Day, there's the release of Pixar's new feature, as I mentioned at the opening, Soul, and you have a role in it, and
Mhm.
ironically enough, as a pet psychiatrist.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, you can't write this stuff. You really
No, you
can't.
can't. You really,
It
truly
is just the beauty and richness of life. You can't write this stuff.
can't.
So, given that a role in a Pixar film is a coveted one for most anyone in voiceover,
Mhm.
can you walk us through how that came about?
How that came about? Well, I was sitting at home one day. No.
And a tornado came and ripped the roof off my house while I was narrating an audiobook in West County.
It would be so fun to do improv with you. It really would. Uh, what happened is my agent, she knew about this audition. She had to be aware it was Pixar. But anyway, I wasn't told that part. She had this audition and offered it to another actress who I won't mention. And that other actress said, I don't think I meet the specs, but I know another actress who does. And so I wound up reading for the role. And at first, I didn't really want to do it. I really can't explain it. It just didn't feel like me. And so my agent and my friend, the fellow actress, said, read it. As though they had me by the throat, read it. So do yourself a favor, read it. So I did, and I booked it. But one of the things that happened that was just completely unexpected is when I went over to the studio, because this is no home studio thing. So I go over and I'm expecting to lay down the copy, which means just, get in front of the mic and they record you while you do your
Well,
lines.
and this would have been a callback because you had already submitted your initial
Yeah.
audition.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, it's better explained. So, at any rate, I'm expecting to get behind the mic, and the director said, well, first of all, I'd like for you to tell us a story. Based on the sentence that I'm going to say to you, I'm going to say this sentence, and then you finish the story any way you want. It just needs to be for a couple of minutes. And so he told me that the therapy cat lady, which is the role that I play, has been asked to transport a bunch of emotional support animals. Now these don't laugh.
I'm not laughing
These
at
Yeah,
no, I'm not laughing
right.
at the fact that people have emotional support animals.
I
Please,
know.
please, I'm not laughing at that. I will add just
Me and 30 cats in a car,
is
please.
that how many they gave you or you oh,
Yeah, yeah.
30?
A whole bunch of cats, lots of cats. And cats are, as I'm sure you're aware, are not entities that you can tell what to do. They're not orderly.
Or an animal that you're particularly enamored of, which adds so much juice to this
Well, I
story.
keep trying to get away from cats because I'm allergic to them. And I think the cats just instinctively somehow know that I'm not the person that's going to grab them all up and hug them and pet them and carry on. So they are attracted to me because they're not going to be restrained. The minute they're attracted to me, I push them off. And that, of course, just sets up a battle. So, at any rate, anyway, these were mythical cats that I had in this car. So I told them the story of how I packed 30 cats into the car and delivered them from one place to the next. And I love silliness. It's one of the reasons I love improv. You can be as silly as you want. And I like absurd
And so
things.
you're telling this story at
Uh-huh.
Pixar when you think you're going in to do a callback, and
Uh-huh.
they just wanna get a sense of your personality and take on who the character is before you even delve into the lines, is that right?
That's right. Thank God for the 2 years of improv because it really not just teaches you how, but puts you in a mental attitude of acceptance. Okay, you're in this situation. Okay, you're an elephant. All right, you're a lemon. Or, whatever it is that they decide that you are. And you're,
Right.
the famous thing in improv, yes, and.
Yes.
Just
Yes,
accept it.
and.
And
I'm an
also,
elephant that tastes like a lemon or smells like a lemon or looks like a
right,
lemon,
and our
yes.
friend the octopus, has desires for this lemon, but let's not go there. So
That's a whole other different that's a whole other area of psychology. We'll stay
yeah,
away
we'll
from that.
just we're being very discreet about this. We're not gonna don't talk about this. At any rate, I placed the animals or the cats in the car, and one of them was by the gear shift, and one hung over the mirror, and then I opened the moon roof, and I had one, facing the opposite direction that the car was going, so its tail hung over the windshield, and every time the windshield wiper would clean it off, the cat's tail would come by and mess it up again. And arguments between cats about, dominance and whose paw was in whose nether parts. And it continued in that vein, and then this went on for about a minute. And when most of the people were laughing, he said, "Okay, that's enough." And then we went and laid down the copy. And on the way out, you're escorted because, intellectual property is a big deal in the movie world. So they don't have people just wandering along. So you don't have a police escort or anything. It's just another cast member or somebody, a tech guy who works at Pixar. But they had big pictures of one of my ego ideals, you know, people that I really admire. In this case, it's a pig, Miss Piggy
Mm.
is a character that they drew. And I love Miss Piggy. I just adore her because she's so confident and with so
Inner
little
pigginess.
evident reason, you but she doesn't care. She doesn't know that. And so, the famous "moi,"
Mhm.
moi. So I wanted to know, I whipped out my phone and said, could we stop long enough to just take a picture with me and Miss Piggy? "Oh, yes, of course." 'Cause they're very nice at Pixar. Everybody is very welcoming, and they want you to do well. And you just enter this realm of everybody helping everybody else. You hear these kinds of, well worn out tropes about show business, about the kind of people that are in it. They're all desperately self-centered, and they all would, slit each other's throat in a minute or trip each other down the stairs for a role. I've never found that true. And the higher up you go, the more accomplished the actors, the less that's true of them. They just they just are very giving people.
I would say more so in voiceover than any other genre.
Mhm.
Having lived
Yeah.
in Hollywood and done on
Yeah.
camera and then moved up here, I would say even on camera actors up here are a lot more generous. And voiceover in particular are very generous. And when you get to that level, and that's one thing that a lot of maybe people who haven't been in the business for a long time don't understand is they want you to solve their need or fulfill their need.
Yeah.
So, of course, they're gonna be nice. So when you walk in confidently and you can share a story like you did, that's showing confidence, that's showing with someone who, whether it was on the spot through your improv training or just a well thought out character development, that's what they're looking for. And so, how wonderful that you had that experience.
Yeah, the thing that they were looking for is in that situation when you're asked to, I don't know, sing or tell a story or, do something that most people feel inhibited by. And I did too. And I would have stopped me cold had I not had any improv training. I'm certainly not at the point at this point, or I'm not certain that I ever was, able to walk into an improv troupe and just be able to, within 30 minutes be a seasoned player with it, or somebody who didn't stand out as not knowing what they were doing. But I had enough of the philosophy of improv and some of the skills for 2 years worth of study to know what was fatal. The one thing that you don't want to do in a situation like that is the thing that you are most tempted to do. Most human beings would be, and that is to stall, to delay, to play for time so that you can think up a scenario to act out.
Yeah.
And the one thing that you have to do is to open your mouth and start talking. And you almost talk your way into it. So there I was in the car, me and the 30 cats. Well, automatically that sets up an image in
Mhm.
the audience's mind of, "Oh god, one cat would be bad, but 30 of them?"
30 in a
Yeah,
car.
and I thought about it later and because once you get into the story and you start spinning it, it's sort of feels like you can't lose because I thought about, you know what, I could have said, and then when the cop pulled us over, and I thought, oh my God, I violated a health regulation or something. I'm going to get a ticket. I'm not going to be able to deliver the cats. If I'm in jail, what's going to happen to the cats? And what the cop actually said was license and registration. And
Please.
didn't even
Yeah.
notice the cat.
Didn't see, this was your monologue
Yeah.
that you had created. This is fantastic. So, when did you realize that this you had actually just recorded your part as opposed to doing a callback?
I realized that, first of all, I completed the story, and then I thought, well, I'm not at the time, I thought, well, I'm not exactly sure why we're doing this, but obviously they're looking for something, so I'm just gonna the one thing you wanna do in an audition is do what the director asks, and if they ask you for something different, give them something completely different. So, I was just religiously doing what I was asked to do and being polite about it. And then I went to the microphone and we laid down the part, and so I thought, "Okay, well, great." And then nothing happened, and nothing happened for years. 2 years went by, and I never heard another word from these people, and I didn't know if the movie had been canceled or, what had happened.
It wasn't 2 years before you knew that was the part that you recorded, correct?
Yeah.
You knew shortly after that that you had actually recorded the part, you got the part that you auditioned for. It's just that it was 2 years before the release
Yes,
happened, correct?
exactly, yes.
Okay. And you've seen the film.
I have seen the film, and I made a mistake in thinking about it that you would not have made. Because you would have heard this over and over and over again from your friends in the industry, or maybe it happened to you. You get in front of a camera, you have the lights, you get in front of the mic, you've got all the equipment, you're saying the lines, people are saying lines to you, etc. And you think that's what's going to
Mhm.
appear because that's the script you've been given. But I was not aware of the fact that many times they have scenes in movies that whole scenes can go down, or a whole direction the movie was gonna go in is suddenly aborted, and they're gonna go off in a completely different direction. Well, in animation, there's even more chance that that's gonna happen because you've got oh god, you have so
So many
many
moving parts,
animators
sure.
and so many. Yes, exactly, and at any given point, it many times happens not because of a conflict between people or an argument of some kind. It happens for technical reasons, or it happens that a director, leaves the studio and somebody else comes in, or all of a sudden there's a wholesale change in the lineup of all the movies that they're doing, and they want to delay this one and bring the other one forward. It then COVID comes in on top of it. So for a variety of reasons, what I found out after going on Facebook and letting people know, hey, the movie is out, I can now talk about that NDA. Well, it was a part in the Pixar movie, and I had a
Non-disclosure
very.
agreement for those listening who might not be familiar with an NDA.
Oh, yes, right, sorry. And so now I can tell you I'm playing this part. It's small, but hey, I'm the therapy cat lady, so I will have a voice. And then listening to the movie, and guess what? 3 pages has become 3 lines.
And
So
welcome to Hollywood.
I thought,
Welcome
"Welcome
to
to the
Holly and
movie
guess what, though?
business."
You have 3 lines in a Pixar film, and Laura, there's so many parts to your story that are incredibly motivating, and you and I have had this personal conversation, but I think for
Mhm.
people who there might be listeners who are either new to voiceover, who have a dream of doing animation, or whatever it is they want to do, and they're tucked away somewhere outside of Hollywood, which, of course, as we know, with everybody having home studios and with COVID, it's certainly made it the world has opened up to everybody because it had to in
Mhm.
this way. And yet, you are an older woman living in West Sonoma County in Sebastopol. You are an audiobook narrator, and you have this opportunity that opens up for you. And it just shows in my mind possibility. It shows how where people say things are impossible, they are
Mm-hmm.
very much possible. And I think right now at a time when so much seems impossible because of COVID, that to hear a story like yours, and I certainly want to respect you not wanting to name the other actor, but I want to speak to that for a moment too, because I think in knowing who we are and what we can bring to whether it's an acting role or something else, to be centered enough to go, okay, this isn't for me, but I can see it for somebody else. And I know for you and everything you just shared, that wonderful story about improvising, and every time you have told it, I laugh because I see the cats. I am a cat person. I have had a cat in the car with me while I've been going to the vet. And it is, that term herding cats is exactly what you were doing, and yet it was rich and full, and so that role was meant for you to have. And I think it's inspirational at a time when people really need to hear inspiring stories. One of the things that I think is kind of sad is you weren't able, now in the scheme of things being sad and kind of heartbreaking, I mean, let's put it in perspective, but I would imagine there was a red carpet ceremony that you would have been part of, and in any other grand Hollywood style of a opening of a film,
The premiere.
premiere, yeah, that would
Right.
have been available to you, and that wasn't. But it doesn't take away from the fact that maybe someone listening to this is hearing a story that, you know, really is only written by a kind of fate, and also an homage to your life's work. I mean, a pet psychiatrist of all
Yeah.
roles,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And I just love that story, and I plan on seeing it whether you have 3 lines, 30 lines, 3 pages, 30 pages.
Oh,
You
bless
are
your heart.
in. Huh?
I said, bless your heart.
Bless your heart, and I know you don't mean that in the true Southern sense.
No, I don't mean it in the true Southern sense, no. So many improbable things happen, and they're all around us, and I mean, you keep hearing them happen to younger people, but older ladies are people too, and they happen to us.
Mhm.
Just utterly improbable things. I mean, I'm just sitting there, I don't know, eating cereal or pulling weeds or some of the things that I
Or
normally
pulling weeds
do.
while I'm eating cereal.
Oh, I could have done that. I could have done that. Yeah, it's a combo deal. And the phone rings, and there we are. We're off to the races, and here I'm being offered a part in a movie. I didn't know it was a part in a movie. I didn't know it was Pixar. I would never have dreamed if they told me it was a Pixar movie. I'd thought, "Oh, no."
Well, if you don't mind me sharing, there was a time not too long ago that you weren't even quite sure what Pixar was.
There's that.
Which makes
Cheryl, there are times I look down at the computer board and I don't know what half the
Which
things
makes
are.
this story even more rich and beautiful. And like you say, the improbabilities, look, the fact that we can wake up each day and be healthy right now is,
Mhm.
with the odds that are so against us, is a
Is a
gift.
gift.
And to realize that no matter what age we're at, the only narrative, if you will, that we need to listen to is, what do we believe our possibilities are? Dare I say, what does
Mhm.
God say we're capable of doing? Because that's who's gifted us. And I think using our gifts is a gift back to our creator. So I just love this story,
Absolutely.
and I thank you for sharing it. And I'm wondering if there's anything else you would like to talk about as it relates to this time in your life.
I think that we've pretty much covered it. What I especially like is being able to look back at it and see, how much I've enjoyed whatever I'm doing at the time. I mean, there are times when at any job where it's a pain and you give it up for $1.50 and no question asked.
Or less.
Or, "Hey, we could talk, we could
Wait,
talk."
we'll bargain. I'll pay
Yeah,
you.
right, it wouldn't hurt. But to look back on it and realize I didn't quit social work because I was worn out or a burnout case or just thought I can't listen to another person's problems another second. It wasn't like that at all. I loved doing what I was doing. And I love doing this. I love telling other people's stories and bringing them to life. And the reason that I like audiobooks is I love telling stories.
And I appreciate you telling your story today, coming on 19 Stories and sharing just a glimmer, really a glimmer of your wealth of life experience and the stories you have. And this is really one for the books, because whether or not you ever do another animated feature, your one out of the gate is it's it's no small potatoes.
Yeah.
It's just one of those really wonderful stories. They're inspiring, they're motivating, filled with possibility of what someone can do when they're just open to saying yes.
Yes. And
Yes, and.
exactly.
Well, Laura Wills Mooney, I really appreciate this time with you. And, I think I'll just sit back and watch what else comes your way, because next you'll be telling me you're moving to Los Angeles because you got a animated series. And
Right.
it's the cat psychiatrist has her own show now.
Okay. Me and Dr. Phil.
You and Dr. Phil. Yes.
I enjoy, the opportunity that I've had with the interview to be the author this time. I've never been in the author's seat before.
Well, this is part of your press junket. So
I see. Okay.
maybe your only press junket. But hey,
Very well. If they can take 3 pages and make it 3 lines, we're having a miniature press tour right here.
press tour, right? Hey, I'm giving you more time than Pixar gave you, but I can't compete with them. How delightful. I can't wait to see it. I have seen a still of your character that they've animated, and it's just delightful. I wish you many, 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 many more
Thank you.
surprise opportunities. And you're just a pleasure to know. And I wish you a very happy Christmas, a very healthy new year, and just continuing to see what unfolds for you.
Back at you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Laura. I'd also like to thank the following news outlets for the use of their clips in so aptly painting the picture of the fear that we're facing during this pandemic. BBC, PBS, Now This, UNESCO, and Some Good News. I especially want to thank Joel and Luke Smallbone, otherwise known as the group for King and Country, for allowing me to use an excerpt of their song Together, which could not be a more hopeful and inspiring song for such a time as this. Finally, I'll leave you with the following from Proverbs 23:18. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Thank you again for joining me today. Feel free to offer feedback or a story idea at 19stories@soundsatchelstudios.com. Visit my website at soundsatchelstudios.com, via Instagram at Cheryl Halling VO. I look forward to sharing more stories on the next episode of 19 Stories From Fear to Hope. Until then, stay healthy and hopeful.
Together with our differences, together we are bolder, braver, stronger.